views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Social Justice Forums. I am Daren, Jaime. Of course, we thank you for joining us. If someone asks the question, what is the Social Justice Forum about? We're a show that deals with the inequities that many people face. We provide multiple points of view. We talk to a lot of people, and then we also promote civic engagement. So we want you to stay with us because the Social Justice Forums starts right now. The COVID-19 pandemic has definitely presented multiple issues and disparities in New York, particularly right here in the borough of the Bronx. 2 in 5 Bronx families are not sure if they'll be able to pay next month's rent. Half of Bronx families still lack access to reliable internet for online learning, while 3 in 4 families are worried about having enough food. These are just a few of the findings of a new report from South Bronx Rising Together, a project of Children's Aid, Bronx Impact Initiative, advocating for families in the Bronx's Community District number 3. Now, the report seems to aim to better understand the barriers students and their families have faced during the COVID-19 public health crisis. And joining us now to share a little bit more, we're joined by the Community School Director at Children's Aid, Cherron Murray. And Cherron, good to have you.
Oh, nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And your report is in depth, and you definitely highlight a lot of the challenges. I'll unpack them a little bit at a time, but let's go a little bit to the report. How long did it take for this report to actually be put together?
Not very long. What happens is that every quarter or so, we do a needs assessment, and this happens anyway. We just gathered the information, kind of just making sure we had enough time between the initial COVID quarantine to now. We just send out the information to the parents. We encourage them to fill it out, and this is our findings.
Right. And when we talk about some of your findings, let's go through this. Food insecurity is huge. And when you look at parents right now, what can you tell us more about the food insecurity issue?
I mean, it's a trickle-down effect, right? So COVID has impacted parents' ability to work. So with that lack of income, you get things like food insecurity. And we know that the South Bronx, these issues aren't new, right? We know that none of this information is really new, but what COVID has done is really, really kind of shed a light on the fact that it's now more of an issue than ever. So it's just really the result of the impact of lack of employment, already kind of lack of access to nutrition and proper food. So this just kind of exasperated it, the COVID-19 pandemic.
So when we talk about the pandemic, a lot of things have come to light, and your report has definitely highlighted that. You talked about food, but then we also talked about rent, and many people worried about whether or not I'm going to be able to pay next month's rent. A lot of people have been the beneficiary of the governor's moratorium on rent, but what are you finding?
I am finding that many of our students, they're moving away. They're going back to the Dominican Republic, for example. They're moving to other places where the rent is potentially lower. So we're losing a great deal of students who are just moving away because they can't afford to live here anymore.
Yeah. Concerns you?
Very much. It's a huge concern. Yes.
Yeah. And when we talk about that, we talk about food insecurity, we talk about housing insecurity, and the rents and being able to, make ends meet. What can be done right now, and what are you doing in terms of trying to bridge that gap?
We're doing a couple of food pantries, at schools, different locations that where Children's Aid is operating out of. Also, we also give schools funding to do food distribution to their students. We're constantly in contact with families about where locations. There's different locations in the city. Schools, for example, they give out breakfast in the morning. So just kind of making sure that families have the information where they can actually get food, because food is being distributed at schools. Children's Aid, we're about to open up several pantries in different locations. So we're just making sure, they have the information they need, because I think part of the issue is that there's programs and there's things happening, but parents don't have the information to where to go get these things.
Yeah, access to information is critical. I'll switch subjects for a minute. It's kind of like along the lines of access to information. That access, of course, now that we're not really outdoors, is coming via the internet. We know that a lot of parents are having to make that adjustment and challenge it to the internet. Some people are saying, listen, this should be automatic. But the reality is it's not an automatic for a lot of parents. And then also for students, too, with online learning. What can you share with us about the challenges of online learning and also parents making that transition?
So it feels like it should, because we're living in a technology age, or what we think is the technology age, and everybody should be, well versed in how to operate technology. But operating my cell phone and operating a platform where I have to submit information, I have to, learn how to use Google Forms and use different programs is way different. So there's a huge technology education gap with many of our students. It did not translate from phone to computer at all. So, we found ourselves, training students and kind of, making sure parents knew how to log into different programs to access the just basic, the schoolwork, the daily schoolwork. It was extremely difficult to try to train parents or children to do these things, because without knowing this information, academically they won't be successful. Just up until recently, it's still like a very constant battle with trying to make sure people know how to log in to get their schoolwork, and parents know where to get information. It's a huge disconnect.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I know that your report also comes with some recommendations. Let's talk about some of the recommendations that you're looking at in terms of trying to bridge that gap that you're seeing right there in the community.
Yeah, so some of the recommendations are to just kind of make sure that every family has the digital devices that they need, and that's being done. Although it was some delays in that, where most of our families, I would say 100, almost 100, probably 90, over 90% of our families have everything they need. Just making sure we're improving communication, and that we're ensuring that teachers and children's aid staff members are available to kind of address the needs of the students and the family on a regular kind of ongoing daily basis. So it's really about the information and
Yeah.
improving communication.
Yeah. I know one is like really improving the quality of remote learning, right? I mean, I think that that would be definitely a game changer for a lot of kids. But talk to us about this, because we know that parents have the challenge. But what are you hearing about students with laptops and portable devices? Is every student about equipped with what they need?
Yes, yeah, pretty much. We're and if a student is lacking something, for example, you might have the computer device, but you might not have internet. We've been, making sure students have hotspots. Also, Children's Aid, has given schools computer donations. So, and you just have to constantly make sure you're communicating with parents, and that you're constantly asking if there's anything that you need to improve the quality of the education of the student.
Yeah. The issue of mental health is very important, especially during a time like this. A lot of people uh, have some challenges, and COVID-19 has exacerbated those challenges. What can you share with us about mental health and your findings?
So what we're finding is that students, just like the adults who are dealing with this, are dealing with um, just the kind of onset of being in your home all the time. You're now in your home, so now you might be a caregiver. Although you're also a teenager, but your parent has to go to work, you might be a caregiver. Just really reporting, and just really the findings are like reporting that students are just feeling stress, some anxiety about not only, I have to take care, my siblings or my family or, help out in the house, but I have to also perform academically, which is also challenging for a lot of students because, we're missing that community element of going to school and, peer, building relationships and things like that. So just a lot of students are reporting a lack of, a lack of motivation, and just, a lot of stress and anxiety about what's happening in their lives.
Yeah, and I mean, it's definitely unprecedented, right? We've never seen this before. Students are trying to deal with it. Parents are trying to navigate with you, navigate through it. But how has you, as an organization, been coping with it as well?
We provide provide our employees with kind of meditation classes. We're constantly making sure that we're not overdoing this Zoom thing, the computer fatigue, just constantly checking in with our employees, just like, all organizations are at this time, making sure that they're mentally strong to help the children in our community. So just making sure, checking in with them emotionally, checking in with them, making sure that we have resources that they're able to access for their own mental health.
And if people aren't so familiar with your organization, would you please give us a little bit about your organization?
So Children's Aid is a organization which was started here in New York City. We at this point we're in all of the boroughs, I think, except for Queens. And we are an organization that supports initiatives inside of the school. So it's a community school. So there's schools that have children aid staff inside of their schools. We do tons of outside things like we're inside of community centers. We have our own community center. So we're all throughout the city in every capacity you can think, especially dealing with the needs of our citizens in New York City, basically.
Yeah. Has it been a hard challenge with the COVID-19 pandemic, really, in terms of being able to reach and stay connected?
Yes, it's. I mean, we've been working throughout the COVID pandemic from the beginning. Many of our staff members, they haven't had the luxury of working from home. So they're on the ground, feeding the homeless. They're on the ground addressing the needs of our families. So it's difficult because many of the employees have been affected by COVID, their families, and just trying to stay connected, especially inside of the schools with families. It's extremely difficult because everybody is actually going through the same thing, and their needs are very similar. Be that employee, and if you're working for Children Aid or if you're helping somebody who is being affected outside of the Children Aid organization.
Yeah. And how do you see things playing out going forward for your organization and the work that you continue to do?
Oh, we're going to continue doing the work. You know what I mean? We're going to continue supporting communities in the Bronx. We're going to continue, following the school leads as far as when we're returning to school and supporting our students. We're going to keep doing what we're doing, and even more so now with this particular report coming out, and just knowing that our families and our community, they need us more than ever.
Right. And as the report goes out, where do you go from here with that report?
You just start implementing, whatever the recommendations. You start speaking to other community organizations, and get into talking to people who are leaders in the community and about what their needs are, and we start kind of addressing those recommendations and implementing those recommendations from the report.
Yeah. And so, if people want more information about the organization, what do they do?
Oh, okay. They can visit Children's Aid website. It's a ton of information on there. So yeah, just visit the website, and it's a ton of information for sure.
Yeah. And as summer's coming upon us, I know that, we're in the middle of spring already. Well, it's not the middle, but just starting spring, but people are going to start to look towards the summer. Can you give us a little bit of a sneak peek as to what we can possibly expect for the summer?
So in the summer, we work closely with the Summer Youth Employment Program, especially in our schools. So look forward to, students and young people getting jobs this summer. We'll continue to offer academic support, food and security support. Just we'll continue to do exactly what we're doing now, but definitely looking forward to giving some of our youth jobs this summer.
All right, Cherron, we're going to leave it there, but thank you so much for joining us here on the Social Justice Forums. Great having you here with us.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
All righty, and listen, we're taking a quick break. We want you to stay with us. We do have more here on the Social Justice Forums coming up right after this.
There's a special election on Tuesday, March 23rd, and if you live in any of these neighborhoods, you'll want to pay attention. Your councilman, Andrew Cohen, is now a judge, and there are 5 candidates looking to replace him. Whoever wins on March 23rd will join New York City's primary lawmaking body, making decisions that affect you, your family, your home, and even your workplace. Starting in 2021, New York City will use ranked choice voting in primary and special elections for local offices. Ranked choice voting simply means that voters can rank up to 5 candidates in order of preference, instead of casting a vote for just one. You can still vote for just one candidate if you prefer. You can learn everything there is to know about the District 11 City Council race and the candidates by visiting ballotpedia.org and riverdalepress.com. Stay informed, and most importantly, make sure you mail your absentee ballot the day before Election Day on March 23rd, or safely head out to the polls to have your vote count and your voice heard.
And welcome back to the show. The Right to Remain Silent campaign is a statewide coalition to secure passage of legislation codifying New Yorkers' right to counsel before police interrogation. Well, the legislation modifies the Family Court Act and Criminal Procedures Law, ensuring a child under the age of 18 may only be interrogated by law enforcement after a young person is consulted with counsel, thereby ensuring any waiver of rights under Miranda is genuinely knowing, voluntary, and intelligent. Joining us now to share a little bit more on the details of the matter, I'm joined by the National Director of the Youth Campaign and Leadership at the Gathering for Justice, Luis Hernandez. And Luis, good to have you.
Pleasure to be on. Great to speak about this topic. It's really, really important, and I'm glad that I can shed some light today.
Yeah, it really is important. And I think about the Central Park Five, and I think about their story. And I think about how your legislation actually correlates with that, what the legislation actually correlates with that story. Talk to us a little bit more about the rights of young people and why you feel so strongly about this.
Absolutely. I think at its core, children and young people from New York's Black and Brown communities particularly are vulnerable in an inequitable justice system. Centuries of wrongful incarcerations tell the stories of young people whose lives have been discarded because of coerced or false confessions. You mentioned Central Park Five, which is one of the most important stories that New Yorkers know. I mean, at least I grew up knowing the story of the Central Park Five, and the injustice that they experienced. But the Central Park Five are just 5 of hundreds of thousands of young people who have experienced wrongful incarceration because of false or coerced confessions. And that starts with the initial interrogation that happens with police officers and young people not having access to legal counsel. And it also isn't mandatory for young people to have legal counsel present during these interrogations. And we're talking about folks who we know are not mentally prepared to be under a surmountable amount of pressure, which is an interrogation. For any regular adult, being in an interrogation with police officers is nerve-wracking and frightening in a lot of ways. And just imagine how that is for a young person who's literally just looking to give a police officer any answers they could to just get out of that scenario.
Well, I want to look at some of the laws, right? And currently, let's take a look at New York State law, and let's look at what it does with particular regards to young people. Number one, police are allowed to interrogate a child without a parent or a guardian present. And then two, police can actually lie to a youth in order to induce that child to waive their right to remain silent. And we've seen that in several cases.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you highlighted Central Park 5, which I think is a common denominator here, especially because of the recent docu-series on Netflix, When They See Us. So many people are talking about this. So many people are talking about what we can do to prevent this. Yet we're not actually shifting and moving the policy. It's been over 3 decades since the Central Park 5, and yet still there isn't legislation in place that protects the regular procedural protocols of any other young person. I see in California, we've seen recent legislation pass. Across the country, we're seeing legislation being introduced as a result to When They See Us and the story of the Central Park 5, now that it's really once again reached a national platform and national attention. Yet in New York, legislators haven't acted, and I think this is a real opportunity to step up and really advance youth justice in a lot of ways. A lot of the conversation that we had recently during our public launch was, this is just the very start to what young people need when we talk about transformative justice and restoring justice and really creating environments that no longer are harming young people. And policing is at the core of it. When we talk about the protests that happened this summer, the ways in which young people were arrested for simply showing up on the streets. Oftentimes, there were young people being interrogated in those rooms, and likely if they have no counsel present, they're admitting to whatever the police officer wants them to admit, as long as it superficially means they get to leave, which we know that the longer term consequences is that they're eventually wrongfully incarcerated for things that they're not responsible for because they just said a false confession to be able to get out of the room.
Right. And we understand that 90% of young people, particularly in New York State, actually waived their Miranda rights. And when I looked at that, I thought that was quite startling.
Yeah, I mean, years of research by psychologists and sociologists and so many others have made it clear that even under controlled circumstances, children lack the capacity to fully appreciate the meaning and significance of their right to remain silent. It's a fundamental right that our Constitution gives us, right? And it's something that hasn't really been instilled in the lives of young people. I think a lot of what was highlighted in the conversation was specifically for families like mine, right? Coming from an immigrant household, our parents tell us cooperate with the police officer. They don't want to see us, or they don't want their child to end up on the news story at 5 o'clock as the next person, the next hashtag, the next person killed at the hands of police. And so what they tell us from a very young age is, if you're ever stopped, if you're ever brought in for questioning, if police interaction ever ensues, just tell them whatever they want you to tell them. Do whatever you have to do to get out of the situation. And that's sort of the practice that for years, generations of families have instilled into their children, not understanding that the detrimental effects that come with that when there's so many other factors at play in police precincts, specifically working with police officers who are simply trying to meet quotas, who are simply trying to secure their next arrest, secure their next rank in these precincts. They're doing whatever they have to do to get any information, whether or not it's true. The authenticity of the story, facts are the least they care about. What they're thinking about is the next arrest, the amounts of arrests, the percentages of how many arrests they made stick and become crimes that are eventually tried in court, whether it's family court or criminal court. And these are the sort of situations that we're facing, especially when over 90%, as you noted, young people are waiving their rights to their Miranda rights. One, because they don't really know what the Miranda rights are. We all hear it and we all know it from infamous shows like Law and Order, but we don't really understand what that fundamental right means for us as it pertains to the Fifth Amendment and what we have the right to actually do, not just as young people, but as people in America.
Well, I think the other challenge is when you talk about it from a child perspective, that's one thing, but also from a parent perspective. I want to look at a couple more. and take a look at some of New York State's laws here. The police are not required to explain to the child and the child's parent or guardian what it is that the police want to question the particular youth about. And then police do not tell the child, the parent, and or guardian that the child can stop answering questions at any time the child chooses.
Right, right. And that's what I mean by practices that happen in police precincts that no one really knows about. Those are the underlying conditions that parents don't understand. If they don't have law degrees, if they're not practicing attorneys, these are things they don't know. And that's why we're really urging this piece of legislation, because it will require that legal counsel be present. A parent is great. Having that emotional support is amazing, but oftentimes our parents also don't know the legal framework that the police precincts follow or don't follow. And so when we have legal counsel present, we know these things. We know that we can stop talking at whatever time we want. We know that we do not have to answer any questions that the police officers have. Besides giving our name, our database, our date of birth, and potentially where we're from, police officers really don't need to know anything else. And if you speak to any defense attorney or any criminal or even civil attorney, the first thing they will tell their clients is, do not tell the police officers anything. Anything you say can actually be used against you. And that's what's read to young people as a part of their Miranda rights. But people don't necessarily understand what that entails. They don't understand the detrimental effects that one brief thing that you say in that interview with a police officer that eventually is being recorded or captured or noted somewhere can eventually be exactly what incriminates you during a trial proceeding.
And so when we look at this right here, the legislation has gone forward. Where do we see things moving as of right now?
We're in a really good place. The Senate has since introduced a bill. There's currently some legislative changes right now happening to the Assembly bill in the New York State legislature. And we both have Senator Jamal Bailey from the Bronx, as well as Assembly member Latoya Joyner and so many others who are backing the bill. There's many co-sponsors. And so right now we're urging legislators across the state of New York to show up. If you're truly for Black lives, if you're truly in defense of young people, as many have publicly come out and stated over the past year, now is the time to show up, right? We need you all to talk to us in policy. Quite frankly, young people need these protections that should be protocol, that should be basic, that are simply meeting the needs of the constitutional rights of young people. But New York doesn't guarantee that right now. And so the legislation is moving along. Recently, we launched, again, the Right to Remain Silent campaign, which we had tremendous support by many elected officials. There's over 100 organizations. I believe the number is 170 organizations and political campaigns that have since backed this piece of legislation. And so there's tremendous support across New York State, and as well as across the New York State legislature. And so now's the opportunity to pass the bill, but it's really up to the moral will of not just the New York State legislature, but also the governor. What are they willing to do right now in this moment to actually push forth this piece of legislation, especially in a budget year where they're going to try and use COVID-19 and our deficits as an excuse for not passing this bill.
So you've heard from people who are critics on the other side. Are there many?
I mean, there's always going to be critics, but I think in this specific case, we're talking about something that's a fundamental right, and in a lot of ways really indisputable. What a lot of people are coming forth with is really underlying, really superficial ideas of what could happen when counsel is present, or the stories of many of young people who have been wrongfully incarcerated potentially being reopened because of false confessions that have been used and shown up in court as ways to prosecute young people. So that's really what's coming up. But besides that, a lot of people and a lot of supporters have garnered around this piece of legislation because it really just meets basic needs. It's really answering to what should already be a fundamental right that children have.
Yeah. We talked at the top of the segment about the prominent piece of the Central Park Five and how that really has, when they see us, has really garnered the attention for a lot of people, not just across New York State, but across America. How much does that amplify your voice, given the fact that if that doesn't happen, if we don't see that movie, there is a chance that maybe many people aren't so quite aware?
Yeah, I think it provides a tool for us to use. And I think that's the lovely piece about storytelling. While it isn't completely factual and it isn't a documentary per se of the story of the Central Park Five, it captures a lot of the important elements that expose not only the New York Police Department, but the New York State court system that has too often prosecuted children for crimes they didn't commit based on false confessions and coerced confessions. And so that's the reality that we face. I think we're in a really good place because we have the support of folks like the Central Park Five. Yusuf Salam was someone who joined us for the public launch, and I'm honored in a lot of ways to be able to to have been able to work with him over the years through my work here at the Gathering for Justice. And really, in this space, my immediate thought was we need to bring him in here, right? When we're building this coalition, when we're really creating a platform for young people to leverage their voices and provide testimonies, having that framework and that long-term analysis of what this not just this protocol or lack thereof of this protocol has done to young people is important. And Yusuf Salam brought that exact really knowledge to it. He raised the alarms around the fact that it's been over 3 decades since, and legislation like this still doesn't exist, but also raised the alarms about the basic police practices that are happening across the state and what legislators are really charged to do now. They have the real responsibility as people who have been elected to represent New Yorkers to pass this legislation. Over the summer, we pushed and were able to garner enough support to repeal 50A, right? But things like that was a start. It was the very just scratching the surface of where we need to be in a state that claims to be so progressive.
Right. And we know that for those people who may not know, Dr. Yusuf Salam is one of those that are exonerated from the Central Park Five, Dr. Yusuf Salam. Share with us a little bit about that relationship and what has Dr. Yusuf Salam been able to mean to you and the work that you're actually doing, and what have you learned from him?
Yeah, I think I've learned so much. One, I've known Yusuf Salam at least over the 4 years. I met him when I came to the Gathering and Justice League. A lot of the work that I did initially in this space was really as an impacted person. I came to know the Justice League. I came to know a lot of this work after my brother was wrongfully incarcerated for over a year on Rikers Island. And myself and my mother had spent months really just trying to break up any resources, calling the Bronx borough president, calling many elected officials, all to preliminarily be ignored, right? And my brother's story highlighted the effects of bail specifically in the bail system. And ever since, because of my brother's story and a lot of the work that we really pushed through the New York State Legislature, we were able to see a lot of bail reform enacted. While there were many rollbacks this past year, which is another sort of conversation for another day, with many problems that we need to fix. But bail was one of the main issues in my brother's case that kept him incarcerated. And through that story and working with Yusuf Salam and the rest of the Central Park Five, we were able to not just understand what my brother was necessarily going through, because I think oftentimes when they're in the situation, when they're currently really facing and enduring that trauma, their stories that, I mean, for example, my brother doesn't necessarily know how to articulate his own story because he's still enduring that trauma. He's still seeking it and doing his own, he's undergoing his own healing process that allows him to really come to a place where the Central Park Five is right now, where they're able to actively tell their stories as people who've experienced this as young folks. And being with them and in community with them has not only provided us with, and personally me, with the understanding of what my brother went through in that process, but also allowed us an opportunity to leverage not just my brother's story, not just their story, but these collective stories and experiences to push forth legislation, to really uplift our demands in many ways. And the Central Park Five has been a part of the Justice League NYC, which is the Gathering for Justice's New York-based task force community for years now. And in this space, a lot of the work that we've done collectively has really pushed forth a lot of our agendas here locally in the city, as well as in the state and other parts of the country. But over the past year, intentionally working with Yusuf Salam and his daughter, Aaliyah Guillory Nickens, who's another young person, incredibly active and on the front lines of the movement. She's a member of Justice League NYC and has really also led a lot of the fight for this campaign, Right to Remain Silent. And also as someone who's been system impacted, she knows what it's like to be arrested at school and not just face the embarrassment, but face the realities of the school to prison pipeline. And these are things that young people, I mean, to know that even Yusuf Salam's daughter and many other folks are still enduring this, it just goes to show the track record of generational trauma that not having legal counsel and not having the support that we need perpetuates throughout generations.
Yeah. You spoke a little bit about, real quickly, you spoke a little bit about your brother and him being at Rikers Island. Knowing the story of Khalif Browder and knowing how his story ended up, how traumatizing was that for you?
I mean, I learned about Khalif Browder's story early on, right? And the onset of that was the scary experience of, could this happen to my brother, right? Because we know that Khalif eventually made it out of Rikers, but the detrimental things that they face are things that just can't be reconciled. I mean, from abuse to harm to really gaslight, toxins that they endure while being in Rikers Island are things that no one should have to experience, but are things that have long-lasting effects. And we've seen what happened, sadly, with Khalif Browder, right? And learning his story really put myself and my family in a place where what can we do immediately to secure the resources and things that we needed to secure to make sure that my brother didn't experience that. And so we were lucky enough to have the support of the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Organization, who really was the organization who put up the money and really bailed my brother out over a weekend span after being introduced to us. Quickly thereafter, the Gathering for Justice, Justice League, and so many of the coalition partners that came together to free my brother, they really garnered and brought together a lot of resources to make sure that he had what he needed to not just survive, but to thrive as a young person who had been incarcerated for over 13 months on Rikers Island and faced those detrimental effects, particularly for a crime he didn't commit. And while that shouldn't be a negating factor of whether or not he has access to resources, that was the reality that he experienced, and really the reason why he got a lot of the support that he did.
Luis Hernandez, we're going to leave it there, but thank you so much for sharing with us, bringing us to light the issues that young people are facing, and the legislation. We'll continue to follow the story and definitely have to bring you back.
Thank you. Pleasure to be on.
All right, Luis Hernandez, our guest here on the Social Justice Forums. Don't go anywhere. We'll return in a few.
Most at risk for coronavirus: people over 65, people with underlying medical conditions like heart disease, chronic lung disease, asthma, diabetes, people undergoing cancer treatment, and people with weakened immune systems. What should you do if you or a loved one is at higher risk? Avoid close contact with people, avoid crowds, stay home if you can, wash your hands frequently. Learn more ways to protect yourself and others at coronavirus.gov. To the show. New York is home to one of the largest and most diverse immigrant communities in the United States. Its threats to immigrants' well-being and rights have increased in recent years.
Whether due to the cruel deportation agenda of former President Trump's administration or local anti-immigrant ordinances, New York has especially been impacted. Our next guest is policy counsel at the NYCLU, whose work focuses on state and local policy, as well as legislation to protect the rights of immigrants, including policies which disentangle local authorities from immigration enforcement. Here now to share a little bit more, we're pleased to be joined by the Policy Counsel of ACLU of New York, Ahmad. And Zach, good to have you.
Hi, good to be with you.
Thank you for being with us. And as we did say at the top of the lead of the segment, that we do have a very diverse community here in New York, more so than anywhere else in the United States. But when we talk about what we're seeing with regards to immigrant rights, a lot of people still not satisfied. So give us a little bit about the work that you're doing right now with Boots on the Ground.
Sure. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the things we're trying to do in the legislature this year. So in recent years, the legislature has done a number of things to protect the rights of immigrants. It's made driver's licenses available regardless of immigration status. Last year, the legislature passed a bill that helps keep ICE out of our courthouses. But there's still a lot more that the city could do to make sure that people's due process rights are being protected, and that people are free from, or people at least, have the confidence to know that their state and local government is not conspiring with ICE. And so that's what the bill that I wanted to talk a little bit about today would do. It's called the New York for All Act. And what this bill would do is it would ensure that state and local authorities, including law enforcement, are not using their resources, their time on duty, to conspire with ICE and to help funnel people into ICE custody and put them down the path for deportation. So it would make sure that people's information is safeguarded. It would make sure that people who are in custody know their rights if they are interacting with ICE. It would make sure that law enforcement officers aren't telling people if someone is in jail when they're being released, so that ICE can come pick them up. It really follows the lead of what other states have already done, most notably California and Washington, and what certain places both in New York and outside of New York have done at the local level. Here in New York City, we have some laws that put in place some boundaries between how the city and the state can conspire, or how the city rather can conspire with ICE. But as you move across the state, there's kind of a patchwork of local laws. And in some places, there are no protections at all or no policies at all to speak of. And we know that that local law enforcement does work hand in hand, both with ICE and Customs and Border Protection, CBP, which operates Border Patrol. So this is a law that would make things consistent across the state. And while it wouldn't solve every problem that immigrants are facing, it would make sure that that New York is not participating in a cruel and misguided federal immigration enforcement regime.
And you talk about how other states have already adopted policy. What have you heard so far out of New York in regards to embracing this?
So I think there's a lot of support and eagerness to put this kind of thing in place in New York. There have been bills in the past that have passed the Assembly to do very similar things. This bill is a little bit more robust in terms of the protections it would provide than what's been done in the past. And as I mentioned, the legislature has already taken several steps, such as making driver's licenses available or making sure that ICE is out of our courthouses. Governor Cuomo has issued a few executive orders that apply specifically to state employees. So I think there's a lot of indication that New York is ready to embrace these kind of policies. It's just a matter of making sure that they're consistent across the state, and that's what this bill would effectively do.
Yeah, and so we talk about the bill. Where does it stand now?
Sure. So the bill has been introduced in both the New York Assembly and the New York Senate. Assemblywoman Reyes from the Bronx is the sponsor in the Assembly, and Senator Salazar from Brooklyn is a sponsor in the Senate. And we're working to get it pushed through, and hopeful that we can that we can pass it this year. You know, there are new people signing on, new lawmakers signing on to the bill each day as they continue to hear more about it. And so we're pushing, and we're both educating members of the assembly and also educating communities across New York about what the bill would mean for them, and making sure that everyone knows what the opportunity is here to pass this legislation.
Give our viewers some perspective on this as you talk about the law. We know that a lot of families have already been impacted and affected by this. For someone who may not know and say, listen, you know, why this is important, give us a little bit of, you know, some background in terms of some family stories possibly that you can share with us about the impact it's had.
Sure. Well, I'll speak a little bit more generally, but what I'll say is that ICE, over the course of its existence, since it came into existence in the early 2000s, has really built its enforcement structure on the backs of local law enforcement. So something that we hear about regularly, particularly in regions upstate and often in border regions, are examples where someone will say, be pulled over for a very minor traffic offense, maybe like a broken tail light or something, and then at that point they'll be profiled, and an assumption will be made about their immigration status. Questions will be asked about their immigration status, and if the police officer is conducting that stop believes that that person might be undocumented, that might result in a call to Border Patrol or ICE, the local field office, and then that will lead to someone coming onto the scene and that person ending up in ICE custody because of the actions of local law enforcement. And there are different variations of that you see across the state. Now, state law already prohibits people from being held past their release date. If someone is in custody, if someone is in jail, they can't be held longer than they otherwise would be, so that ICE can come pick them up. But what's not clear under the law is whether or not, or it's not clear under the law that ICE cannot be told of when a person is being released. So that's another thing we see across the state. Our local jails informing ICE about when a person is being released from custody, and then ICE will show up at the jail and take that person into custody and essentially enact a double punishment on that person, who, in addition to the consequences that they're already subject to under the criminal legal system. So this is something that happens in New York City. It's something that happens in the suburbs in Long Island and Westchester, and even more so as you spread out across the state and you have fewer policies in place. So what this bill would do is it would take away that piece of it. It wouldn't allow ICE to build its enforcement structure on the backs of local government. It would make sure that New York is not participating in that kind of cruelty and not helping separate families.
Right. And we hear the stories of separate families all the time. And, the question gets into when does a lawyer allowed to enter into the fray? And so I know that there's a component about right to a lawyer. Talk to us about right to a lawyer. When does those who are being affected like this have a right to a lawyer?
Yeah, so someone who's in immigration proceedings or is being confronted by ICE or being asked questions by ICE absolutely has a right to a lawyer. But one important thing to note is that currently, unlike in the criminal system, a person who is in deportation proceedings doesn't have the right to a lawyer at the government's expense. While we do have programs in the state and particularly in the city that allow people to get that kind of representation through city funding and state funding that's been made available, there's also a bill in the legislature that would make that kind of right absolute and guarantee that if someone is in deportation proceedings or in removal proceedings, that they have a right to not only a right to have a lawyer, but a right to have a lawyer that the state of New York will pay for. That's called the Access to Representation Act, and that's another bill that we're pushing for. What the New York for All Act would also do is it would make people aware that they have that right at critical moments. Specifically, there's a part of the bill that would require that people who are, say, in a local jail, they've been arrested perhaps for a very minor offense, and they're being detained in local custody. Under the New York for All Act, they would be given information about what their rights are in interacting with ICE, including their right to remain silent and including their right to contact a lawyer and have counsel with them if they choose.
Yeah. So for people who want to be on board in terms of supporting the movement, supporting the work that's going on, how can the public be a part of this, about this engagement?
Yeah, there are a lot of opportunities for the public to engage. We've been holding community conversations across the state. The NYCLU has, in partnership with some of the other organizations we're working for. Those are open conversations for people to come hear more about the bill, perhaps share their thoughts and experiences with immigration enforcement if they choose. And there are a lot of things that people can do. They can call their lawmakers and urge them to pass the bill. They can educate their own neighbors about the impact that ICE's enforcement has had on their communities and why New York shouldn't be a part of it. There are any number of things that people in the community can help do to put this across. And there's more information on our website and links that people can include to get, or that people can click and get onto lists where they can keep abreast of the developments that are happening and become more involved in the campaign.
What are some of the biggest challenges you're facing right now in the work that you're doing?
There are a lot of challenges that I could speak to, but perhaps one thing to speak to is I think a sense of complacency, not from all, but from some, about what the new administration means for immigration enforcement. The Trump administration, I don't think I have to tell people, was a particularly terrible time for immigrant communities, and really saw ICE enforcement ramped up to a degree that we haven't seen before. And we now have a new president who has promised a different approach to immigration enforcement, but there's a lot we still don't know about what new federal policies will be more permanently, what impact they're going to have, and how they'll differ from what we've seen in the past. I would like to remind people that even under the Obama administration, we saw more deportations than under any president prior to that. So, this is something that is a system that's in place. It's not something that's it's not something that's going to change simply because new people come in and might try to put in place a more lenient approach. And so that, I think, is one challenge now, is reminding people that, what we've seen over the past years is part of a system, and part of an especially cruel system, and a system that's designed in a way that is not built to protect the rights of immigrants. And we need to be vigilant about that, going forward, and not take for granted that things are going to change just because we've had a change in administration.
Yeah. Amidst the pandemic, we now know that vaccines are continuing to roll out across the United States. Many now seeing record numbers of vaccines hitting their hometown. Talk to us a little bit about in the jails and ICE facilities about vaccine distribution. What can you tell us?
Yeah, so that is an ongoing issue, and we're trying to find out more about what the federal government's plans are and what the state's plans are to vaccinate people who are in ICE custody. Here in New York, we have a large federal immigration detention facility in Batavia, New York. That's federally owned and operated, but it exists in New York. And then in Orange County and a few other places, there are people who are in local jails who are in ICE custody, but are physically in the custody of those local jails via contract. And there's a lot we're trying to learn about what the vaccination protocols are for those populations, and a lot more answers that we want. I think we're not satisfied so far that either ICE or the state has put forth a meaningful plan to vaccinate people who are in ICE custody, and that should be a priority. We know that COVID-19 is particularly threatening in congregate care settings, and particularly in jails and prisons. And so, we should know a lot more than we do now about how ICE and the state, to the extent it's involved, what they are doing to make sure that those people are vaccinated and are being protected.
Yeah. How has COVID-19 impacted the ICE facilities from what you can tell us?
Well, there have been outbreaks at ICE facilities, not just in New York, but also in New Jersey, across the river, where many New Yorkers who end up in ICE custody are detained. And it's been a huge issue since the beginning of the pandemic. There have been large outbreaks. There has not been a sufficient response to that. There have been calls by advocates, including ourselves, to release people who, particularly people who are vulnerable to COVID-19, people who are elderly or who have underlying conditions. And ICE has not done that to the extent that's satisfactory. So just as COVID-19 has been deadly in jails and prisons across New York State and across the country, it's had a similarly disastrous impact in ICE detention facilities.
So for people who want more information, we know that they can get connected to seeing local news and local media. Is there a petition that's being circulated? Is there anything else that's going on in terms of gathering more public support for the work that you're doing?
Yeah, there's a lot of information available on our website. That's nyclu.org. If you go there and you click on the immigrants' rights section, you will be directed to a lot of information about the litigation that we're involved with around immigrants' rights, as well as the New York for All campaign, and how people can get more involved in that and try to address this from the state and local level. There are also organizations we're working with, like the New York Immigration Coalition and the Immigrant Defense Project, that have a lot of information available about that people can both educate themselves with and things that they can plug into to take action. So there's a lot out there, and I'd be happy to provide more of that information. So perhaps you could provide it to your viewers. But there are many, many ways for people to get involved, and there are also opportunities. I've talked a lot about kind of what's going on in New York State and in New York City and at the local level. But there are a lot of opportunities to also advocate at the federal level. Call your congressional representatives, call the Biden administration, make sure that they are hearing your voice and what people want in terms of a new and more humane immigration system going forward. So yeah, there are a lot of petitions. There are a lot of action opportunities, and I'd be happy to provide more information on that so you can provide it to your viewers.
All righty. Well, Zach, we're going to leave it there, and thank you so much for joining us. And certainly we'll continue to update our viewers on New Yorkers for All and all the work that you guys are doing at the NYCLU. Thanks much.
Thank you.
All righty. Zach Ahmad, our guest here on the Social Justice Forums. And of course, we want to let you know that as we've had a good show today, we are about out of time. And we want to let you know that you can catch another episode of the Social Justice Forums next week here on BronxNet's channel 67. We want you to also stay connected to us on social media. Of course, BronxNet TV, and definitely our website at BronxNet.org. Next week, we come back again, elevating the conversation, bringing you some of the issues and the inequities that many people face. And then we're going to do our best part to promote some civic engagement. For all of us here on the Social Justice Forums, I'm Daren Jaime saying take care and God bless.